"Mom, I'm going to lose everything unless you help me right now." The words hit me like a punch to the chest, stealing my breath away. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if you, for even a second, feel like this sounds familiar, I just ask that you leave a like and subscribe, because this story might help someone draw closer to God's love. Amen. My name is Margaret Rose Sullivan, and I'm 72 years old. I live in a small apartment in Queens, New York, where the radiator clangs like an old friend every morning, and the smell of Mrs. Chen's dumplings drifts through the thin walls. My hands are weathered from 60 years of working, first in the textile factories, then cleaning offices at night while raising my daughter Emily as a single mother. These hands have folded countless loads of laundry, prepared thousands of meals, and held my worn leather Bible every morning for the past 5 decades. That Tuesday afternoon, I had just finished my daily reading from Psalms, chapter 27, verse 10. "Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me." I always paused at that verse, wondering why God had put it on my heart so many times. The autumn light filtered through my kitchen window, casting golden shadows across the small table where I ate my meals alone, where I paid my bills with careful precision, where I wrote letters to Emily that she rarely answered. My apartment wasn't much, a one-bedroom with linoleum floors that curled at the edges and wallpaper that had seen better decades. But it was mine. Every piece of furniture told a story. The rocking chair where I'd nursed Emily through childhood fevers, reading her Bible stories until she fell asleep. The china cabinet holding my mother's dishes, each plate a memory of Sunday dinners when family meant something sacred. The small television where I watched morning mass when arthritis made the walk to St. Catherine's too painful. I had been humming "How Great Thou Art" while washing my lunch dishes when the phone rang. Emily's name on the caller ID made my heart skip. She rarely called anymore, too busy with her life in Manhattan's financial district, too important for regular conversations with her aging mother. "Emily, sweetheart," I answered, immediately sensing the tremor in her breathing. "Mom, I don't know what else to do." Her voice cracked like a child's. "The bank is foreclosing on our house in Westchester. David's business failed, and we're 3 months behind on the mortgage. I've tried everything, Mom. Everything. They want $60,000 by Friday or we lose it all." I set down my dish towel with trembling fingers. $60,000. More money than I'd ever seen at one time in my entire life. My retirement account, built penny by penny from factory wages and night cleaning jobs, held exactly $68,000. My life savings, my security, my safety net for medical bills and emergencies. "Have you talked to your father?" I asked quietly, though I already knew the answer. Richard had remarried a younger woman and moved to Florida, leaving his past, and his daughter, behind like yesterday's newspaper. "He won't even return my calls, Mom. You're the only one who—" She dissolved into sobs. "The kids don't know yet. Little Sophie keeps talking about her birthday party next month. She wants to invite her whole class to our backyard. How do I tell a 7-year-old that we might be living in a shelter?" My chest tightened. Sophie, my granddaughter with her gap-toothed smile and wild curls, who called me Nana Maggie, and still believed I could fix anything with prayers and chocolate chip cookies. And Michael, 10 years old, quiet and serious, who loved building model airplanes while I told him stories about his grandfather, the father he'd never meet, because Richard couldn't be bothered with grandchildren who reminded him of responsibilities he'd abandoned. "Emily, honey, let me think about this." "There's no time to think." Her voice rose to near hysteria. "I need an answer now. The bank closes at 5. If I don't have a certified check by then, we're done. Finished. And I can't let my children become homeless because I failed them." I closed my eyes and felt the familiar weight of my daughter's pain settling on my shoulders like a heavy coat. All my life, I had been the one people turned to when everything fell apart. When Emily's teenage boyfriend broke her heart, I held her while she cried. When she struggled through college, working 3 jobs to pay tuition, I sent her every spare dollar I could manage. When she married David against my gentle warnings about his business schemes and financial instability, I smiled and bought her dress and pretended I believed everything would work out fine. Now, here she was again, 35 years old, and I was still the only port in her storm. How much do you need exactly? I heard myself asking, though my heart already knew I would say yes before she answered. 60,000 for the back payments and penalties. If we can catch up, David thinks his new venture will turn around by Christmas. We just need time, Mom. Just a little time to get back on our feet. Time. The one thing I was running out of, and she was asking me to spend my future buying hers. I walked to my bedroom where my financial statements sat in a manila folder inside my nightstand drawer. Next to them lay my mother's rosary, the wooden beads worn smooth by decades of faithful hands. I picked up both, the papers representing my earthly security and the rosary representing my heavenly trust. Mom? Are you still there? I'm here, sweetheart. I stared at the numbers on my bank statement, calculating quickly. If I gave her 60,000, I'd have 8,000 left. $8,000 to last me however many years God granted me. $8,000 for medicine, groceries, utilities, emergencies. $8,000 between me and complete dependency on a daughter who hadn't visited me in 6 months. But what choice did I have? Let my grandchildren lose their home? Watch my daughter's marriage crumble under financial pressure? Stand by while my family scattered like leaves in a storm? I can transfer the money today, I whispered, the words tasting like ashes in my mouth. The silence stretched so long I thought the line had gone dead. Mom? Did you say, are you serious? You can actually do this? I'll call my bank right now. They can wire it directly to your mortgage company. Emily's sobs of relief echoed through the phone, but they sounded different now. Lighter, almost giddy. Oh my God, Mom. Oh my God. You just saved us. You saved my whole family. I promise we'll pay you back. David's got this new investment opportunity, and once it pays off, don't worry about paying me back right now, I interrupted gently. Just focus on taking care of those babies. I love you, Mom. I love you so much. You're an angel. You're literally an angel sent from heaven. After I hung up, I sat in my rocking chair and stared at the wall where Emily's school pictures hung in mismatched frames. Kindergarten through high school, her smile growing more confident each year, her dreams expanding beyond the small world I could provide. I had done everything I could to give her opportunities I'd never had: college, travel, the chance to marry for love instead of survival. And now, with one phone call, I had given her everything I had left. I picked up my mother's rosary and began to pray, the familiar words tumbling from my lips like water from a spring. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. But even as I prayed, a cold knot formed in my stomach. Something about Emily's voice at the end of the call had changed. The desperation was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost calculating. I pushed the thought away. This was my daughter, my child, the little girl I had rocked to sleep with lullabies and Bible verses. She would never deliberately deceive me, would she? Outside my window, the sun was setting over Queens, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. In a few hours, my life savings would be gone, transferred to save a house I'd never been invited to visit, for a family that rarely remembered I existed. I whispered one more prayer before the darkness settled in completely. Lord, if I've made a mistake, please don't let my grandchildren pay the price for it. But deep in my heart, I already knew that this sacrifice would change everything between Emily and me. I just had no idea how much. The phone call that was supposed to save my daughter's family had just set in motion the destruction of everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the true cost of giving your heart to someone who's already decided you're not worth keeping. Tomorrow, I would begin to learn exactly what $60,000 of motherly love would buy me in return, and the price would be higher than I ever imagined possible. 3 days after I saved Emily's house, she called again, not to thank me but to ask for more. Mom, I know this is terrible timing, but David needs help with his business loan. Just $5,000. To show the investors we have family backing. I stared at my bank statement, $8,000 remaining, and felt my stomach drop. Emily, sweetheart, I just gave you everything I had for the house. I know, but this is different. This is an investment. You'll get it back with interest when David's company takes off. Please, Mom. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. Important. The word echoed in my mind as I remembered all the other important things Emily had needed over the years. The wedding that cost more than my annual income, where I wasn't allowed to invite my church friends because they weren't sophisticated enough. The car payments when David's credit was too poor to qualify for financing. The designer nursery furniture for both children because hand-me-downs send the wrong message about our family's values. Each time, I had said yes. Each time, I had taken money from my modest savings, telling myself that this was what mothers did. We sacrificed so our children could thrive. I had learned this from my own mother, who worked 3 jobs during the Depression to keep food on our table, who never bought herself a new dress so I could have school supplies. But as I sat in my kitchen that afternoon, watching pigeons peck at breadcrumbs on my fire escape, I realized something that made my chest tighten with a pain sharper than any physical ache. I couldn't remember the last time Emily had asked me how I was doing. Not once in the past year had she inquired about my arthritis, which made opening jars impossible some mornings. Not once had she asked about my loneliness, how the silence in my apartment sometimes felt so heavy I would turn on the television just to hear human voices. Not once had she noticed that I'd lost 15 pounds because groceries had become a luxury I carefully rationed. "Mom, are you there?" "I'm here," I whispered, my fingers tracing the edges of my mother's Bible on the kitchen table. "But Emily, $5,000 that's most of what I have left." "I know it's a lot, but think of it as an investment in your grandchildren's future. When David's business succeeds, Sophie and Michael will have everything they need. College funds, family vacations, a secure future. Isn't that worth the sacrifice?" The sacrifice. Always my sacrifice. Never hers. I thought about David, my son-in-law who had never once looked me in the eye during family gatherings, who spoke about me to Emily as if I wasn't sitting right there. "Your mother," he would say with barely concealed irritation, "doesn't understand modern business." Or, "Your mother's generation just doesn't get how investments work." But I understood more than he thought. I understood that in 40 years of working, I had never once asked anyone else to pay for my dreams. I understood that when Emily's father abandoned us, I had worked double shifts and eaten peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so she could have hot meals and new school clothes. I understood that real love didn't come with a price tag attached. Yet here I was again, being asked to prove my love with my wallet. "Let me pray about it," I said finally, the words feeling strange in my mouth. I had never told Emily I needed to pray about helping her before. "Pray about it?" Her voice sharpened with disbelief. "Mom, this isn't the time for prayers. This is business. Real life. I need an answer now. Real life." As if my faith wasn't real. As if the prayers that had sustained me through poverty, abandonment, and decades of loneliness were somehow less substantial than her husband's failed business ventures. "I'll call you tomorrow," I said quietly. Tomorrow might be too late. I hung up. For the first time in Emily's 35 years of life, I hung up on my daughter. That night, I knelt beside my bed on the worn rug my mother had braided from fabric scraps, my arthritic knees pressing into the rough fibers as I opened my heart to God. The rosary beads felt cold in my hands at first, then gradually warmed as I worked through each decade, each prayer a small light in the growing darkness of my doubt. "Hail Mary, full of grace," I whispered, but the familiar words felt hollow. How many times had I prayed for Emily? How many nights had I begged God to bless her, protect her, guide her toward happiness and success? Had my prayers been answered too well? Had I asked God to give my daughter everything she wanted without teaching her to appreciate what she received? I remembered Emily at 5 years old, sitting beside me in the front pew at St. Catherine's, her small hands folded in perfect imitation of mine, as Father O'Brien led the congregation in prayer. She had loved the stories of Jesus feeding the multitudes, caring for the poor, healing the sick. "When I grow up," she had whispered during one Mass, "I want to help people like Jesus did." When had that little girl become a woman who saw her own mother as nothing more than a source of emergency funding? The memories came flooding back then, each one a small cut that together formed a deeper wound than I had allowed myself to acknowledge. Emily's high school graduation, where she had thanked everyone who believed in me, without mentioning that I had worked nights for 4 years to pay for her college prep courses. Her wedding day, where she had danced with David's wealthy father while I sat alone at a table in the back, wearing a dress I had bought at Goodwill because the wedding expenses had already drained my savings. The birth of my grandchildren, when I had offered to help with childcare, but was told that professionals would be handling that responsibility. The Christmases when my handmade gifts were politely accepted but never displayed, quietly replaced by more expensive versions that better matched Emily's sophisticated decor. I thought about last Easter, when I had invited Emily's family for dinner. I had spent 3 days preparing, using my mother's recipes and my finest dishes. Emily had arrived 2 hours late, checked her phone constantly throughout the meal, and left early because David has an important conference call with investors. The ham I had cooked for 8 people lasted me 2 weeks. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners. I continued, but my voice broke on the word, sinners. Was I a sinner for beginning to resent the daughter I had loved more than my own life? Was it sinful to feel tired of being needed only when money was involved? I opened my Bible to a random page, seeking guidance, and my eyes fell on Luke 15:11-32. The parable of the prodigal son. I had read it hundreds of times, always focusing on the joy of the father when his wayward child returned home. But tonight, for the first time, I thought about the older son, the faithful one who had stayed home and worked hard and never asked for anything, only to watch his father celebrate the brother who had squandered his inheritance. "Father," the older son said, "all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends." I understood his pain now. I understood what it felt like to be faithful, dependable, always present, and somehow still invisible when it mattered most. The next morning, I called Emily back. My hands shook as I dialed, and I had to try 3 times before I could speak the words I had rehearsed all night. "I can't give you the $5,000. Silence. Then, "What do you mean you can't? You said you had 8,000 left." "I do, but I need some money for myself, Emily. For medicine, for groceries, for emergencies. I'm 72 years old, and if I give you everything, I'll have nothing." "Nothing?" Her laugh was sharp, cutting. "Mom, you have Social Security. You have Medicare. You're not going to starve." "Emily," I began, but she cut me off. "You know what, Mom? I thought you loved your grandchildren. I thought family meant something to you, but apparently your bank account is more important than Sophie and Michael's future." The accusation hit me like a slap. After everything I had given, everything I had sacrificed, she was questioning my love for my grandchildren? "That's not fair." "Fair?" Her voice rose to a shout. "You want to talk about fair? Fair would be having parents who actually support their children instead of hoarding money like some Depression-era miser. Fair would be having a mother who understands that sometimes families have to stick together. Families stick together." The words burned in my throat. When had Emily ever stuck with me? When had she visited me in the hospital last year when I had pneumonia? When had she called to check on me during the blizzard that knocked out power in Queens for 3 days? When had she remembered my birthday without Facebook reminding her? "I gave you $60,000 3 days ago," I said quietly, "and I'm grateful for that. But this is different. This is about building something lasting, something that will benefit all of us. All of us. Except I wouldn't benefit from David's success. I wouldn't be invited to the celebrations or included in the prosperity. I would remain what I had always been, the emergency contact, the backup plan, the one who gave everything and expected nothing in return. "I'm sorry, Emily, but I need to keep what little I have left." "Fine." Her voice turned cold, stranger cold. "But don't expect me to come running when you need help. Don't expect me to take care of you when you're too old to manage on your own. Independence works both ways, Mom." The line went dead, and I sat staring at the phone for a long time, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Emily had just threatened to abandon me if I didn't continue funding her lifestyle. My own daughter had reduced our relationship to a financial transaction. That evening, as I prepared my simple dinner of soup and crackers, I realized something that should have terrified me, but instead brought a strange sense of relief. I had finally said no to Emily. and the world hadn't ended. The sun still rose. The pigeons still came to my fire escape for breadcrumbs. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, still smiled when we passed in the hallway. I was still here, still breathing, still beloved by God, even if my daughter's love came with conditions I could no longer afford to meet. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully that night, my mother's rosary clutched in my hands and a prayer of gratitude on my lips, not for Emily's happiness, but for the strength God had given me to finally choose my own survival over her endless demands. I didn't know then that my small act of self-preservation would unleash a fury in Emily that would change everything between us forever. But I was beginning to understand that sometimes love requires boundaries, and that saying no to those we love might be the most faithful thing we can do, for them and for ourselves. 2 weeks passed without a word from Emily. 2 weeks of silence that felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. I tried to convince myself this was normal, that busy mothers sometimes went weeks without calling their elderly parents. But deep down, I knew this silence was different. This was punishment. This was Emily's way of showing me the price of saying no. My 73rd birthday came and went on a Tuesday in October. I woke up that morning with a flutter of hope in my chest, checking my phone every few minutes for a call that never came. By evening, I had received birthday wishes from Mrs. Chen next door, from Father Rodriguez at St. Catherine's, and from 3 ladies from my prayer circle. Nothing from Emily. Nothing from David. Nothing from my grandchildren. I sat in my kitchen that night, staring at the small chocolate cupcake I had bought myself from the bakery downstairs, a single candle flickering in the darkness, and felt something cold settle in my chest. For the first time in my life, I began to wonder if I had raised a daughter who was capable of genuine cruelty. The next morning brought worse news. Mrs. Patterson from the church auxiliary called to tell me that Emily had been at Sophie's school play the previous week. The same school play I had asked about 2 months ago, hoping to attend. "Oh, Margaret, she looked wonderful," Mrs. Patterson gushed, not realizing she was twisting a knife in my heart. "That little Sophie is such a doll. Emily mentioned she was so busy with family obligations she barely had time to breathe." Family obligations. While ignoring the family member who had literally kept her family housed and fed, I hung up the phone and walked to my bedroom, where I kept a small photo album filled with pictures of Sophie and Michael, birthday parties I hadn't been invited to, Christmas mornings I had watched from the periphery, school events I had learned about after the fact. In every photo, Emily glowed with the confidence of a woman whose life was financially secure because of her mother's sacrifice. Designer clothes, perfect makeup, the kind of effortless beauty that comes from never worrying about money. While I sat in my drafty apartment, counting quarters for laundry and eating generic soup from cans, my daughter was living the life my sacrifice had purchased. But what broke my heart wasn't her prosperity. It was her silence. The deliberate, calculated way she had erased me from her life the moment I had stopped being useful. October turned to November, and still no word. I started attending daily mass instead of just Sundays, needing the comfort of routine prayer and the gentle presence of Father Rodriguez, who had noticed my increased devotion without commenting on it directly. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said one morning after service, his kind eyes crinkling with concern. "You seem troubled lately. Would you like to talk?" I almost said yes. Almost poured out the whole story. The money, the silence, the growing realization that my daughter might not love me the way I had always believed. But shame held my tongue. What kind of mother admits that her child has abandoned her? What kind of woman confesses that she might have raised a daughter who sees love as a transaction? "I'm fine, Father. Just getting older, I suppose." He nodded, but I could see he didn't believe me. "Remember, Mrs. Sullivan, that God sees every sacrifice made in love, even when those we love fail to see it themselves. Your faithfulness doesn't go unnoticed." Those words sustained me for exactly 3 days, until I ran into Emily at the grocery store. I was in the checkout line, carefully counting out exact change for my modest purchases. A can of soup, bread, milk, and the small luxury of real butter instead of margarine, when I heard her voice behind me, loud, confident, talking on her phone about weekend plans. "David thinks we should get the new BMW instead of leasing. Why not? We can afford it now that we're caught up on everything." I turned slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. There she was, my daughter, looking radiant in a coat that probably cost more than my monthly budget. Her cart filled with organic produce and imported cheeses and wine that cost more per bottle than I spent on food in a week. Our eyes met across the crowded aisle, and for a moment, I saw something flicker in her expression. Guilt, maybe, or embarrassment. But it passed so quickly I might have imagined it. "Mom," she said, ending her phone call abruptly. "What are you doing here?" What was I doing here? Shopping for food, like every other human being who needed to eat. But something in her tone made it sound like I had been caught somewhere I didn't belong. "Just picking up a few things," I said quietly, acutely aware of how shabby I must look next to her polished perfection. My coat was 3 years old, mended at the elbow where I had caught it on a door handle. My shoes were comfortable but worn. My purse was the same one I had carried for a decade, its leather soft with age and use. Oh. She glanced at my modest purchases with the quick, dismissive look of someone cataloging inadequacy. "Well, we're running late for Sophie's violin lesson. Private instructor. Very exclusive. Private violin lessons. For a 7-year-old. Paid for with money I had given to save their house. How are the children?" I asked, hungry for any connection to my grandchildren. "Busy. Very busy. Michael made the advanced soccer team, and Sophie is practically booked solid with activities. Kids these days have such full schedules. Too busy for their grandmother, apparently. Too scheduled to spare an hour for the woman who had ensured they still had a roof over their heads. Maybe I could," I began, but Emily was already backing away. "Listen, Mom, I really have to run. You know how it is." She was gone before I could finish my sentence, leaving me standing in the checkout line with my can of soup and my wounded heart, while other customers pretended not to notice the old woman who had just been dismissed by her own daughter in public. The cashier, a young girl with kind eyes, smiled at me gently as she rang up my purchases. "Your total is $12.47, ma'am." I counted out the exact change, including the pennies, while Emily's words echoed in my mind. Kids these days have such full schedules. As if I was asking for too much. As if wanting to see my grandchildren was an unreasonable demand on their precious time. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mother's rosary twisted between my fingers like a lifeline. The apartment felt smaller than usual, the walls pressing in with the weight of silence and rejection. Outside, Queens hummed with the sounds of families, children laughing, parents calling them in for dinner, the comfortable chaos of lives being lived together. I thought about the parable of the persistent widow, the woman who kept coming before the unjust judge asking for justice. Will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones, who cry out to him day and night? But what if the injustice wasn't coming from strangers? What if it was coming from the person you had loved most faithfully, most completely, most sacrificially? What if the person breaking your heart was the one you had given your life to protect? God, I whispered into the darkness. Am I being tested or just forgotten? The words hung in the air like a prayer and a protest. A question that demanded an answer I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. December arrived with the first snow, and with it came a text message, not a call, just a text from Emily. "Kids asking about Christmas presents. Can you manage something small this year? Not Merry Christmas, Mom. Not, we miss you. Not, sorry we haven't called. Just a request for gifts." I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to respond with joy. Finally, contact with my grandchildren. Finally, a chance to be part of their Christmas. But another part of me, a part that had been growing stronger in the weeks of silence, whispered a different truth. This wasn't love. This was convenience. Emily hadn't contacted me because she missed me, or because the children were asking about their grandmother. She had contacted me because Christmas was expensive, and I was a free source of gifts. I typed and deleted a dozen responses. Of course. What would they like? When can I see them? Do you want to come for a Christmas dinner? In the end, I wrote simply, I'll see what I can do. But as I sent the message, I felt something break inside me. Not my heart. That had been breaking slowly for months. Something deeper. Something that had to do with hope and trust. and the fundamental belief that love, real love, was unconditional. I had spent 73 years believing that if you loved someone completely, if you sacrificed everything for them, if you put their needs before your own always and without question, they would love you back. Not because they had to, but because genuine love created genuine love in return. I was beginning to understand that I had been wrong. That evening, I did something I had never done before. I wrote a letter, not to Emily, but to God. A real letter, with pen and paper, the kind my mother used to write to relatives far away. "Dear Lord," I began, my handwriting shaky but determined. "I don't know if I've been a good mother or a foolish one. I don't know if I've loved too much or not enough, but I'm tired, Lord. I'm tired of being needed only when money is involved. I'm tired of being ignored until gift-giving seasons. I'm tired of feeling invisible in my own daughter's life." I paused, my pen hovering over the paper. Was it sinful to admit these things? Was it wrong to acknowledge that my love had not been returned in kind? "I don't know what you want me to do," I continued, "but please, if you can hear me, show me how to love without losing myself. Show me how to be faithful without being foolish. Show me how to find peace when the person I love most has decided I'm not worth keeping." I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside my Bible, next to the bookmark Father Rodriguez had given me last Easter. On it was printed Matthew 11:28. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Rest. The word felt like a promise and a prayer, a hope that maybe, somewhere in the silence and the pain and the growing realization that my daughter might never love me the way I had loved her, God was preparing something I couldn't yet see, something that might finally, after 7 decades of giving everything away, give something back to me. But first, I had to find the courage to stop giving Emily more pieces of myself to discard. And that would require a kind of faith I had never needed before, faith that I was worth protecting, even from the person I loved most. Christmas morning came with a knock on my door at 7:30 in the morning. I opened it to find Sophie and Michael standing in the hallway, still in their pajamas, holding the modest gifts I had managed to buy for them: a coloring book and crayons for Sophie, a small model airplane for Michael. Behind them stood Emily and David, their faces set in expressions I had never seen before: cold, calculating, almost triumphant. "The kids wanted to thank their grandmother," Emily said, her voice artificially sweet. "Didn't you, Sophie?" My granddaughter looked up at me with confused eyes. At 7 years old, she sensed the tension but couldn't understand it. "Thank you for the coloring book, Nana Maggie. Mommy said it was very— what was the word, Mommy?" "Thoughtful," Emily supplied, but the way she said it made it sound like an insult. "Very thoughtful, considering Grandma's situation, my situation. As if poverty was a choice I had made rather than the result of giving everything I had to save their house. "Would you like to come in?" I asked, stepping aside. "I could make hot chocolate for the children." "Oh, we can't stay," David interrupted, speaking directly to me for perhaps the 5th time in all the years I'd known him. "We're expected at my parents' house for Christmas brunch. They're serving champagne and caviar. Real celebration, you know." The message was clear. His parents provided luxury and celebration. I provided dollar store gifts and awkward encounters in shabby apartments. "But we did want to show you something," Emily continued, pulling out her phone with the deliberate motion of someone preparing to deliver a blow. "Look what Santa brought the kids this year." She showed me photo after photo: expensive electronics, designer clothes, toys that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Michael had received a professional-grade bicycle. Sophie had gotten an American Girl doll with a complete wardrobe and furniture set. "Santa was very generous this year," David added with a smirk. "Of course, Santa knows which children have parents who make good financial decisions." The insult hit its mark. I felt my cheeks burn with shame and anger. Shame that my gifts looked pathetic next to their extravagance. Anger that they had brought my grandchildren here to witness my humiliation. "It's wonderful that the children had such a nice Christmas," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm raging in my chest. "It really is," Emily agreed. "You know, Mom, watching them open their presents this morning, seeing how happy they were, It made me realize how important it is for children to have grandparents who can really contribute to their lives. Grandparents who enhance their experience rather than— She trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Rather than burden them with poverty, rather than embarrass them with inadequate gifts, rather than love them with empty hands. Sophie tugged on my sleeve. Nana Maggie, are you coming to our New Year's party? Mommy said maybe not because you might not feel comfortable. I looked down at my granddaughter's innocent face, then up at Emily, who was watching me with the cold satisfaction of someone who had just delivered a perfectly calculated strike. I wasn't invited to a New Year's party, sweetheart, I said gently. Oh! Sophie's face fell. But Mommy said— Sophie, honey, come here, Emily interrupted, pulling her daughter away from me. Grandma probably has other plans. Old people don't usually enjoy parties with loud music and lots of people. Old people. As if I was some generic elderly person rather than her mother. As if my age disqualified me from wanting to celebrate with my family. Actually, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice, I would have loved to come to a New Year's party, if I had been invited. Emily's smile faltered for just a moment. Well, it's mostly David's colleagues and their families. Professional people. I just thought, you might not have much in common with them. Professional people. Unlike me, with my factory worker background and night shift cleaning jobs. Unlike me, with my secondhand clothes and generic groceries and apartment that smelled like Mrs. Chen's cooking. I understand, I said, though I didn't understand at all. I understood the words she was using, but I couldn't comprehend how my own daughter had become someone who excluded her mother based on social class. Someone who used my poverty created by saving her family, as a weapon against me. After they left, I sat in my kitchen staring at the wrapped gifts I had prepared for them. A small wall hanging I had cross-stitched for Emily with her favorite Bible verse, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication," and a bottle of cologne for David that had cost me 3 weeks of carefully saved quarters. The gifts would stay wrapped. They had made it clear that my offerings weren't welcome unless they met their standards for generosity. That afternoon, my phone rang. Emily's name on the caller ID made my stomach clench, but I answered anyway, hoping perhaps she was calling to apologize for the morning's cruelty. Mom, I need to talk to you about something important. Her voice was different now, serious, almost businesslike. David and I have been discussing your financial situation, and we're concerned. Concerned about what? About your ability to manage on your own. We've noticed you've become, a bit stingy lately, refusing to help when family needs you. And this morning, seeing where you live, how you're living, she sighed dramatically. We think it might be time to consider some options. Options. The word sent a chill down my spine. What kind of options? Well, there are some very nice senior communities in Queens. Places where you'd have people your own age. Activities, meals provided. David's been researching them, and some of them are surprisingly affordable if you sell your apartment. Sell my apartment. Give up my independence. Move to what everyone politely called a senior community, but what I knew meant an old-age home. Emily, I'm 73, not 93. I'm perfectly capable of living independently. Are you, though? Her voice took on the patient tone of someone explaining something obvious to a child. You're obviously struggling financially. You couldn't even afford decent Christmas gifts for your grandchildren. And we've noticed you've become different lately. More selfish. More focused on hoarding money instead of thinking about family. Selfish. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. After a lifetime of giving everything I had, after sacrificing my retirement savings to save her house, she was calling me selfish for keeping enough money to survive. I gave you $60,000 4 months ago, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. And we're grateful for that. But that was then, Mom. We're talking about now, about your future, about making sure you're properly cared for, by strangers, in an institution. While she lived in the house my money had saved, driving cars my sacrifice had made possible, giving her children the kind of Christmas my poverty had enabled. I don't want to move to a senior community. I know change is scary, but think about it practically. You'd have security, medical care on site, social activities. And the best part is, once you sell the apartment, you'll have enough money to pay for several years of care. It's really the responsible thing to do. The responsible thing. As if I hadn't been responsible my entire life. As if working 2 jobs to raise a child alone hadn't been responsible. As if saving every penny for 60 years hadn't been responsible. As if giving my daughter everything she needed to build a secure life hadn't been responsible. Emily, I need some time to think about this. Of course. But don't take too long. These places have waiting lists, and the good ones fill up quickly. I'd hate for you to miss an opportunity because you waited too long to make a decision. After she hung up, I sat in my rocking chair and tried to process what had just happened. My daughter, the child I had loved more than my own life, had just suggested that I sell my home and move into institutional care because I had refused to continue funding her lifestyle. The woman who lived in a house I had saved wanted me to give up my independence because I was too selfish to make myself homeless for her convenience. I picked up my mother's Bible and opened it randomly, seeking comfort, seeking guidance, seeking anything that might help me understand how love had turned into this kind of warfare. My eyes fell on Isaiah 54:17. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue which rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. Every tongue which rises against you in judgment. Even the tongue of your own child. That evening, I did something I had never done before. I called Father Rodriguez at home. Father, it's Margaret Sullivan. I'm sorry to bother you, but I need to ask you something important. Of course, Margaret. What's troubling you? If someone you love is hurting you, if they're trying to manipulate you or control you, is it sinful to protect yourself, even if that someone is your child? There was a long pause. Margaret, are you in some kind of danger? Not physical danger, but emotional danger, I think. I'm starting to realize that someone I've been trying to help has been, I struggled for the words, has been using my love against me. Love should never be used as a weapon, Father Rodriguez said gently. And protecting yourself from those who would exploit your kindness isn't sinful. It's necessary. Even Jesus withdrew from those who sought to harm him. But she's my daughter, Father. How do I protect myself from my own daughter without losing her completely? Perhaps the question isn't how to avoid losing her, Margaret. Perhaps the question is whether you ever truly had her at all. His words echoed in my heart long after we hung up. Whether I ever truly had her at all. That night, I knelt beside my bed and prayed with a desperation I had never felt before. God, if this is a test, please give me the strength to pass it. If this is a lesson, please help me learn it. But if this is just cruelty disguised as love, please give me the courage to call it what it is. For the first time in months, I felt something that might have been an answer. Not in words, but in a growing sense of clarity that cut through years of confusion and self-doubt. My daughter didn't love me. She loved what I could provide for her. And there was a difference between those two things that I had spent 73 years refusing to see. But I was beginning to see it now. And once you see the truth clearly, you can never unsee it again. The question was, what was I going to do about it? January 15th marked exactly 6 months since I had saved Emily's house. It was also the day I finally found my backbone. I woke up that morning with unusual clarity, as if God had spent the night washing the fog from my mind. For the first time in months, I knew exactly what I needed to do. At 9 o'clock sharp, I called Emily. "Mom, this is early for you," she said, and I could hear the television in the background. Some morning talk show discussing luxury vacation destinations. "Emily, I've been thinking about what you said, about the senior community." "Oh, good. I was hoping you'd come to your senses. David found a place in Flushing that looks really nice. They have bingo on Wednesdays and—" "I'm not moving anywhere," I interrupted, surprising us both with the steel in my voice. "But I do think it's time we had an honest conversation about money." Silence. Then, "What do you mean?" "I mean that 6 months ago, I gave you $60,000 to save your house. My entire life savings. And since then, you've treated me like I'm a burden instead of the person who kept your family from being homeless." "Mom, we've been through this. We're grateful." "No, you're not." The words came out calm and clear, like a river that had finally found its proper course. "If you were grateful, you wouldn't have abandoned me the moment I said no to giving you more money. If you were grateful, you wouldn't have missed my birthday or excluded me from your children's lives or suggested I sell my apartment because I'm too selfish to bankrupt myself for your convenience. I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but this attitude, I said, is called self-respect. Something I apparently forgot I was allowed to have. Another long silence. When Emily spoke again, her voice had changed, harder, more calculated. Fine. You want to talk about money? Let's talk about money. That $60,000 you gave us? Consider it an advance on your inheritance. Because that house you saved? It's going to be worth a lot more in a few years, and guess who's going to inherit it? The audacity took my breath away. She was suggesting that I had paid for my own inheritance, that saving her house was actually an investment in my future that she was generously managing for me. Emily, that house isn't my inheritance. I gave you that money as a gift to save your family. A gift with strings attached, apparently. Look, Mom, if you want to be petty about money, we can be petty. But don't pretend this is about love or gratitude. This is about control. You want to use money to control us, and we're not going to let that happen anymore. Control. She had turned the entire situation upside down, making me the villain in a story where I had been the victim. According to Emily's version, I was the one using money as a weapon. I was the one being manipulative. I was the one damaging our relationship. It was breathtaking in its cruelty and stunning in its effectiveness. For a moment, I almost believed her. Almost fell back into the familiar pattern of accepting blame for problems I hadn't created. But then I remembered Father Rodriguez's words. Love should never be used as a weapon. Emily, I said quietly, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I saved your house because I love you and my grandchildren. I said no to giving you more money because I need to survive. And I'm calling you today because I'm tired of being punished for both of those things. Nobody's punishing you. You missed my birthday. You haven't let me see my grandchildren in months. You've excluded me from family gatherings and made me feel ashamed of being poor. Poor because I gave you everything I had. If that's not punishment, what would you call it? I'd call it natural consequences for being difficult. Natural consequences. The phrase hung between us like a slap. In Emily's world, loving your child enough to save their home and then expecting basic kindness in return was being difficult. You know what, Emily? You're right about one thing. This conversation is about control, but you're the one who's been controlling the narrative, controlling access to my grandchildren, controlling whether I'm included in family events based on how much money I'm willing to hand over. Mom, you're being ridiculous. I'm being honest. For the first time in a very long time, I'm being completely honest. I took a deep breath, feeling something shift inside me like tectonic plates finding new alignment. I love you, Emily. I will always love you. But I will not continue to fund your lifestyle at the cost of my survival, and I will not accept being treated like a burden when I'm the reason you still have a roof over your head. So what exactly are you saying? I'm saying that if you want a relationship with me, it needs to be based on love, not money. If you want your children to know their grandmother, you need to stop using them as leverage. And if you want respect, you need to start showing some. The silence stretched so long I thought she had hung up. Finally, you know what, Mom? Maybe David was right. Maybe you are becoming one of those bitter old women who drives her family away and then wonders why she's alone. The words were designed to destroy me, to send me crawling back with apologies and promises to be more accommodating. A few months ago, they might have worked. But something had changed in me during those long nights of prayer and self-reflection. Something had crystallized during Father Rodriguez's gentle guidance, and the growing awareness that love shouldn't feel like a hostage situation. If standing up for myself makes me bitter, I said calmly, then I choose bitterness over being used. Fine, but don't come crying to us when you're all alone and need help. Independence works both ways, remember? I remember, I said. I also remember that I was already alone, even when I was giving you everything. At least now I'm alone with my dignity intact. This time she did hang up. I sat in my kitchen afterward, my hands shaking from adrenaline and something that felt like relief. I had finally said everything I needed to say. I had finally stood up to the person who had been systematically destroying my sense of self-worth while claiming it was for my own good. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done since before Emily's financial crisis. I went shopping for myself. Not groceries, not necessities, but actual shopping for something I wanted, purely because it would bring me joy. I bought myself a small potted orchid from the flower shop on Northern Boulevard. Purple and white, delicate and beautiful, completely impractical, and absolutely perfect. I bought a new book of devotions from the Catholic bookstore. I even bought myself a piece of chocolate cake from the bakery, the expensive kind with real buttercream frosting. I carried my purchases home like trophies, proof that I was worth spending money on, that my happiness mattered enough to justify small indulgences. In my apartment, I placed the orchid on my kitchen table where it caught the afternoon light, and I read my new devotional while eating cake with real pleasure for the first time in months. That evening, I called Mrs. Patterson from the church auxiliary, not to complain about Emily, but to ask if she needed help with the upcoming parish potluck dinner. "Margaret, how wonderful to hear from you. I was just thinking we could use help with the decorations committee. Are you interested?" I was interested. I was interested in being around people who appreciated my contributions, who saw me as valuable for more than just my willingness to open my wallet. I was interested in rediscovering parts of myself that had nothing to do with being Emily's mother or David's inconvenient mother-in-law. "I'd love to help," I said, and meant it. Over the following weeks, something remarkable happened. I began to remember who I was before I became someone whose worth was measured entirely by her usefulness to her daughter. I remembered that I was good at organizing events, that I had a talent for making people feel welcome, that I could make a mean potato salad and tell stories that made children laugh. I joined the parish women's Bible study group that met Thursday mornings. I volunteered to help with the church's community outreach program. I even started attending the senior center's gentle exercise classes, not because I was old and decrepit, but because movement felt good, and the other women there treated me like a friend instead of a bank account. Most importantly, I began to pray differently. Instead of begging God to soften Emily's heart or to make her love me the way I loved her, I started praying for strength, wisdom, and the ability to love without losing myself in the process. "Dear Jesus," I prayed one morning while tending my orchid, "I don't know if Emily will ever change, but I know that I can't keep sacrificing my peace for the illusion of her approval. Help me to love her from a distance if necessary, and help me to trust that you have a plan for my life that doesn't require me to disappear into someone else's needs." 3 weeks after our confrontation, Emily texted me, "Kids asking about you. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to respond immediately, eager for any sign that she missed me, that she regretted the things she had said. But I had learned something valuable in our weeks apart. Silence could be a form of self-protection, and not every invitation to communicate was actually an invitation to reconcile. I wrote back, "I'm willing to talk when you're ready to apologize for the way you've treated me." Her response came immediately, "I have nothing to apologize for. You're the one who created this situation." I deleted the thread without responding. That Sunday, Father Rodriguez mentioned in his homily that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior. When we constantly rescue people from the consequences of their choices, he said, we rob them of the opportunity to grow and change. Love doesn't mean saying yes to everything. Sometimes love means saying no. I thought about Emily in her beautiful house, driving her expensive car, giving her children private lessons and designer clothes, all made possible by my sacrifice. Had my willingness to save her from every financial crisis actually prevented her from learning to manage money responsibly? Had my unconditional giving taught her that love was a one-way transaction? Maybe the most loving thing I could do now was stop rescuing her from the consequences of taking me for granted. Maybe the most faithful thing I could do was trust that God loved me enough to want me to protect the life He had given me. For the first time in months, when I said my evening prayers, I included gratitude for my own strength, my own worth, my own right to exist as more than just someone else's emergency fund. It felt like the beginning of freedom. February brought the storm I should have seen coming. Emily didn't just call. She showed up at my door on a Tuesday morning with David and both children in tow. her face set in the kind of determination that meant war had been declared. "We need to talk," she announced, pushing past me into my small living room without invitation. "Now." Sophie and Michael huddled near the door, their eyes wide with the kind of fear children feel when they sense adult anger they don't understand. My heart ached seeing them used as props in whatever drama Emily had orchestrated. "Hello, my darlings," I said gently, kneeling to their level. "Would you like some juice? Some cookies?" "They're not here for snacks," David interrupted coldly. "They're here to understand why their grandmother has decided to abandon them." The accusation hit like a physical blow. In Emily's twisted version of reality, my refusal to continue funding their lifestyle had become abandonment of my grandchildren. My boundaries had been reframed as rejection of the people I loved most. "I haven't abandoned anyone," I said quietly, my eyes still on Sophie and Michael. "I love you both more than all the stars in the sky." "Then why haven't we seen you?" Sophie asked, her small voice breaking my heart. "Mommy said you don't want to visit us anymore because we're too expensive." Too expensive. Emily had told a 7-year-old that her grandmother found her too expensive to love. I looked up at Emily, searching her face for any sign of shame or regret. Instead, I found cold satisfaction. She had weaponized my grandchildren's confusion and pain, and she was enjoying watching it destroy me. "Emily," I said, standing slowly, "what exactly did you tell them?" "I told them the truth, that you've decided money is more important than family, that you'd rather hoard your savings than spend time with people who love you." The lies were so breathtaking in their scope that for a moment I couldn't respond. She had turned my act of self-preservation into greed, my boundary setting into abandonment, my refusal to enable her into selfishness. "That's not true," I said firmly, looking directly at my grandchildren. "I gave Mommy a lot of money to save your house because I love your family. But when I said I needed to keep some money for myself, to buy food and medicine, Mommy became angry with me." "That's not how it happened," Emily snapped. "You're confusing them with your version of events." "My version?" I felt something snap inside me, some final thread of patience that had been stretched too thin for too long. "Emily, I gave you $60,000, my entire life savings, every penny I had worked for over 50 years. I did it gladly because I love you, but apparently that wasn't enough. It was never about the money." "It's always been about the money." The words erupted from me with a force that surprised everyone in the room. "When did you last call me just to see how I was? When did you last invite me anywhere without needing something? When did you last treat me like a mother instead of a bank account?" David stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "How dare you speak to my wife that way? After everything we've done for you? Everything you've done for me?" I stared at him in disbelief. "What exactly have you done for me, David? You've ignored me for years. You've made it clear that I embarrass you. You've excluded me from family events because I don't meet your social standards. What have you ever done for me except take my money?" "We included you in our lives," Emily said, her voice rising. "We let you be part of the children's world. We made you feel needed and important. And this is how you repay us? Let me be part of their world." As if my love for my grandchildren was a privilege they had graciously granted, rather than a natural bond between family members. "You made me feel needed when you needed money," I corrected. "The rest of the time, you made me feel invisible." "Well, maybe there's a reason for that," Emily shot back, her mask finally slipping completely. "Maybe the reason we don't invite you places is because you don't fit in. Maybe the reason we don't call is because talking to you is depressing. Maybe the reason we keep our distance is because being around you reminds us of everything we're trying to rise above." The words hung in the air like poison, finally giving voice to what I had sensed but never allowed myself to believe. My own daughter was ashamed of me, ashamed of my modest income, my simple lifestyle, my lack of sophistication. I was an embarrassment she tolerated for my financial usefulness and discarded when the money stopped flowing. Sophie started crying. "Why is everyone yelling? I don't understand." "You don't understand because Grandma is being very selfish," Emily said, kneeling beside her daughter. "Sometimes people get old and forget how to love other people." "I didn't forget how to love," I said, my voice breaking. "I just finally remembered that I'm supposed to love myself too." "Self-love," David scoffed. Classic narcissistic response. Make yourself the victim when you're confronted with your own selfishness. Narcissistic, selfish, victim. They had an arsenal of psychological terms to explain away my pain, to justify their treatment of me, to make my suffering my own fault. But something had changed in me during my weeks of prayer and reflection. I could see their manipulation clearly now, could recognize the patterns that had trapped me for years. They weren't angry because I had hurt them. They were angry because I had stopped allowing them to hurt me. I think you should leave, I said quietly. We're not done talking, Emily declared. Yes, we are. I walked to the door and opened it. You've made your position clear. You see me as an embarrassment who should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention you're willing to provide in exchange for financial support. I see myself differently now. How do you see yourself? David asked mockingly. I looked at my grandchildren, their faces streaked with tears they didn't understand, and felt my heart break and heal simultaneously. I see myself as a woman who worked her entire life to build something good, who raised a daughter with love and sacrifice, who gave everything she had to save her family from losing their home. I see myself as someone who deserves better than being treated like a burden by the people she saved. Emily's face contorted with rage. You want to play the martyr? Fine. But don't expect us to worship at the altar of your self-pity. I don't want worship, I said calmly. I want basic kindness from my own daughter. I want to see my grandchildren without having to buy access to them. I want to be treated like family instead of like an inconvenience. And if we can't give you that? The question hung between us like a challenge. This was it, the moment when I had to choose between the illusion of family harmony and the reality of my own dignity. Then I'll pray for you from a distance, I said. I'll love you from afar, but I won't sacrifice my peace anymore for people who have decided I'm not worth treating with respect. Emily grabbed Sophie and Michael by their hands. Come on, kids. Let's go home where people actually care about each other. As they reached the door, Sophie broke free and ran back to me. She threw her small arms around my waist and whispered, I love you, Nana Maggie. I don't understand why everyone's mad, but I love you. I hugged her tightly, breathing in the sweet smell of her hair, memorizing the feel of her small body against mine. I love you too, sweetheart, more than you'll ever know. And someday, when you're older, I hope you'll understand that sometimes loving someone means refusing to let them treat you badly. Sophie, get away from her, David commanded. We're leaving, now. My granddaughter was pulled away from me, looking back with confused, tear-filled eyes as Emily dragged her toward the stairs. At the last moment, Emily turned back. You've destroyed this family, she hissed. I hope you're happy. After they left, I collapsed into my rocking chair and wept, not just for the confrontation, but for the death of the illusion I had carried for so long. The illusion that Emily loved me the way I loved her. The illusion that my sacrifices had created gratitude instead of entitlement. The illusion that family meant something more than financial convenience. But as the tears subsided, I felt something else. Relief. The truth was out in the open now. There would be no more pretending, no more hoping things would change, no more sacrificing myself for people who had decided I wasn't worth protecting. That evening, I sat with my Bible and my mother's rosary, seeking comfort in the familiar rhythms of prayer. The words of Jesus echoed in my mind. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, leave that home or town and shake the dust off your feet. Sometimes love meant walking away. Sometimes faithfulness meant refusing to enable destruction. Sometimes the most Christian thing you could do was protect the life God had given you from people who would consume it without gratitude. I prayed for Emily and David, asking God to soften their hearts and help them understand the pain they had caused. I prayed for Sophie and Michael, asking God to protect them from the toxicity of their parents' greed and manipulation. But most of all, I prayed for myself, for strength, for wisdom, for the courage to keep choosing my own well-being over their comfort. Lord, I whispered into the quiet of my small apartment, I don't know what comes next, but I know I can't go back to being invisible in my own life. Help me to forgive them without returning to them. Help me to love them without losing myself again. Outside my window, Queens hummed with the sounds of life continuing, families sharing dinners, children playing, People building connections based on genuine care rather than financial utility. Somewhere in that vast city, there were people who would value my friendship, my contributions, my simple presence without requiring me to pay for the privilege. For the first time in months, I began to believe I might find them. The storm had passed, leaving destruction in its wake. But storms also cleared the air, washed away what was false, and prepared the ground for new growth. I was ready to see what would grow in the space Emily's cruelty had finally forced me to claim for myself. 3 weeks after the confrontation, I discovered something miraculous. Life without Emily's chaos was actually peaceful. The silence that had once felt like punishment now felt like sanctuary. My small apartment, which had seemed cramped when I was measuring it against Emily's spacious house, now felt cozy and perfectly sized for a woman who was learning to live for herself again. I established new routines that had nothing to do with waiting for phone calls that might never come or hoping for invitations that would never arrive. Every morning, I woke up and made coffee in my favorite mug, a simple ceramic cup with pink roses that Emily had once called outdated. I sat by my kitchen window, watching the neighborhood come alive while reading my devotions and tending to my orchid, which had sprouted 2 new buds. The buds felt like a sign. Even in the middle of winter, even in the aftermath of devastation, beautiful things could still bloom. On Thursday mornings, I attended the Women's Bible Study at St. Catherine's. The group was small, 7 women ranging in age from 60 to 85, but their warmth more than made up for their numbers. They called me by name when I arrived, saved me a seat, and genuinely cared about my prayer requests. "Margaret looks lighter lately," I overheard Mrs. Rodriguez whisper to Mrs. Kim one morning. "More peaceful. Whatever she's been praying about, it's working. Lighter." The word followed me home that day. I was lighter, not because I had lost weight, though stress had stolen my appetite for months, but because I was no longer carrying the impossible burden of trying to earn love from someone who had decided I wasn't worth loving freely. The revelation came to me one Tuesday afternoon while I was volunteering at the church's food pantry. I was helping sort donations when a young mother came in with 3 small children, her face etched with the particular exhaustion that comes from choosing between rent and groceries. "I hate having to ask for help," she whispered as I packed her bags with essentials. "I feel like such a failure." "Needing help doesn't make you a failure," I told her gently. "It makes you human. We all need help sometimes." She looked at me with gratitude that was so genuine, so pure that it took my breath away. When was the last time Emily had looked at me like that? When was the last time my help had been received with appreciation instead of entitlement? "Thank you," the young mother said, tears in her eyes. "You don't know how much this means." But I did know. I knew because I remembered what it felt like to be desperate, to need rescue, to rely on the kindness of others. The difference was that this woman saw my help as a gift, while Emily had learned to see it as an obligation. Walking home that day, I realized something profound. I had been giving my love to someone who didn't value it while withholding it from people who would treasure it. I had been so focused on earning Emily's approval that I had forgotten how many other relationships were possible, how many other ways there were to matter in this world. That evening, Mrs. Chen knocked on my door with a pot of soup and a shy smile. "I make too much," she said in her careful English. "You help me not waste?" I invited her in, and we shared the soup while she taught me a few words in Mandarin, and I helped her with some English pronunciation. It was the first time I had entertained a guest in my apartment in over a year, and I realized how much I had missed the simple pleasure of conversation without agenda, of connection without cost. "Your daughter," Mrs. Chen said carefully as we finished eating. "She not visit anymore?" I hesitated, then decided on honesty. "We had a disagreement. About boundaries." Mrs. Chen nodded sagely. "Sometimes family most difficult. They think because they family, they can treat you anyway. But respect still important, yes?" "Yes," I agreed. "Respect is still important. In China, we say, blood does not always make family, and family does not always share blood. You understand?" I understood perfectly. Family was supposed to be about love, support, and mutual care, not genetic obligation or financial extraction. I had spent so long trying to force Emily to be the daughter I needed that I had forgotten to appreciate the chosen family God had placed around me. The women at church who asked about my arthritis and brought me homemade cookies. Mrs. Chen who shared soup and conversation. Father Rodriguez who listened without judgment and offered wisdom without condescension. These people had shown me more genuine care in recent weeks than Emily had shown me in years. March brought an unexpected gift, a letter from Sophie. The envelope was addressed in careful second-grade handwriting, and inside was a drawing of two stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. "Dear Nana Maggie," the note read in pencil, "I miss you. I don't understand why we can't see you. I drew us together because I love you. Love, Sophie." I cried over that letter. Not bitter tears, but sweet ones. My granddaughter still loved me despite whatever Emily might be telling her. Somewhere in that house I had saved, a little girl was thinking about her grandmother and missing her presence. I wrote back immediately, a carefully worded letter that expressed my love without criticizing her parents. "Dear Sophie, I love you and Michael more than all the stars in the sky. Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements, but that never changes how much I love you. I'm proud of you for learning to write so beautifully. Love always. Nana Maggie." I didn't know if Emily would allow Sophie to receive it, but I mailed it anyway. Love required faith, even when the odds seemed impossible. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected phone call from David's mother, Patricia Morrison, a woman I had met perhaps 5 times in 10 years of family gatherings. "Margaret, I hope you don't mind my calling," she said, her voice hesitant. "But I needed to speak with you about Emily and David." My stomach clenched. "Is everything all right? Are the children okay?" "The children are fine, but—" She paused, seeming to gather courage. "I know there's been some kind of falling out between you and Emily. She's told us her version of events, but frankly it doesn't add up. David has been pressuring us to lend them money for some business venture, and when I asked why they couldn't ask you for help, since you've always been so generous, Emily became very strange. She said you had become selfish and unreliable. Selfish and unreliable. Even to David's family, Emily was painting me as the villain in our story. Margaret, I've known you for years. You're many things, but selfish isn't one of them. What really happened?" The question opened a floodgate. I found myself telling Patricia everything. The $60,000, Emily's continued demands, the missed birthday, the exclusion from family events, the suggestion that I sell my apartment and move to assisted living. Patricia listened in growing silence. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Oh, Margaret," she finally said. "I had no idea. No wonder you finally said enough. You believe me?" "Of course I believe you. It explains so much. Why they suddenly have money for expensive cars and private schools. Why David seems so confident about investments he can't really afford. They've been living off your sacrifice while treating you like a burden." The validation felt like cool water on a burn I hadn't realized was still painful. "Patricia, I need you to know. I didn't want things to end this way. I tried for months to maintain the relationship, but they made it impossible," she finished. "Margaret, I'm ashamed of my son's behavior. The way they've treated you is inexcusable. And I want you to know that Richard and I won't be lending them any money. If they can't appreciate the family member who actually saved them, they don't deserve help from anyone else." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Vindication. Someone else could see the truth of what had happened. Someone else recognized the injustice of my situation. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't selfish. I wasn't the villain in this story. That Sunday, Father Rodriguez announced that the parish was starting a new ministry for seniors who wanted to mentor younger families struggling with various challenges. Financial hardship, single parenthood, illness. The program would pair experienced parishioners with families who could benefit from their wisdom and support. "Sometimes," he said from the pulpit, "the greatest gift we can give is our presence, our listening ear, our accumulated wisdom. Age is not a burden. It's a resource." I signed up immediately. Within a week, I was matched with Maria Santos, a 28-year-old single mother of 2 whose husband had left her drowning in debt and despair. She worked 2 jobs while trying to finish her nursing degree, and her children, ages 5 and 7, were struggling with their father's abandonment. My first visit to their small apartment reminded me of my own early years raising Emily alone. The same careful budgeting, the same exhaustion around the edges, the same fierce determination to give children a better life than circumstances seemed to allow. But there was one crucial difference. Maria was grateful. "Mrs. Sullivan, I can't believe you're willing to help us," she said, tears in her eyes as I taught her children to make cookies from scratch. "You don't even know us." "I know enough," I replied, watching 7-year-old Carlos carefully measure flour while 5-year-old Isabella stood on a chair to help stir. "I know you're working hard for your children. I know you could use a friend, and I know these little ones could use a grandmother figure." "Abuela Margaret," Isabella announced, having decided on my new title. "Can you teach us more recipes?" "As many as you want to learn, mija." Driving home that evening, I realized something profound had happened. For the first time in years, I had spent an afternoon being useful. Not because someone was manipulating me into it, not because someone was leveraging my guilt or my love, but because I had chosen to share my gifts with people who valued them. Maria's children hugged me when I left. Maria herself walked me to my car, thanking me repeatedly for my time and kindness. No one asked me for money. No one made me feel like a burden. No one suggested I was too old, too poor, or too unfashionable to be worth their time. This was what family was supposed to feel like. Chosen, mutual, based on genuine care rather than genetic obligation or financial convenience. That night, I prayed with deeper gratitude than I had felt in months. Thank you, Lord, for showing me that my love has value, even when Emily can't see it. Thank you for Maria and her children, who remind me that generosity should be received with joy, not demanded with entitlement. Thank you for helping me understand that I am not too old, too poor, or too anything to matter in this world. For the first time since Emily's abandonment, I fell asleep not with sadness, but with anticipation for tomorrow. Not because I was waiting for Emily to call or hoping she would change, but because I had rediscovered something I thought I had lost forever. The knowledge that I was valuable for who I was, not for what I could provide. The resurrection of my sense of self was happening in small moments, in kind words from neighbors, in cookies baked for children who appreciated them, in prayers answered not with the restoration of broken relationships, but with the discovery of new ones. God wasn't giving me back the daughter I had lost. He was giving me something better, a life that belonged to me again. 1 year later, I sit in the same kitchen where Emily's phone call once shattered my world, but everything has changed. The morning light streaming through my window illuminates not desperation, but contentment. My orchid has bloomed 3 times since that terrible February confrontation, and each flowering reminds me that beautiful things can thrive even after the harshest winters. Today marks the anniversary of my liberation, not the day Emily abandoned me, but the day I finally chose myself. The transformation didn't happen overnight. There were moments of doubt, nights when I wondered if I had made the right choice, mornings when I woke up missing the familiar rhythm of Emily's chaos simply because it was what I had known for so long. But each day brought small confirmations that I was walking the right path. Maria's children now call me Abuela Margaret, with the natural affection of family chosen rather than assigned. Yesterday, 7-year-old Carlos brought me a crayon drawing of our familia, himself, his sister Isabella, their mother Maria, and me, all holding hands in front of a house with a bright yellow sun overhead. At the bottom, in his careful first-grade printing, he had written, "Abuela Margaret makes everything better." When was the last time anyone had said I made anything better? When was the last time my presence was seen as a gift rather than a burden? The Women's Bible Study Group has become the highlight of my week. We've grown from 7 to 12 members, and I've discovered that I have a gift for leading discussions about the practical applications of Scripture. Last month, Mrs. Rodriguez asked me to consider training to become a lay minister. "You have wisdom born from suffering," she told me after I shared insights about forgiveness during our study of Matthew 6:14-15. That's exactly what people need to hear. Not theology from textbooks, but truth learned through living. The irony isn't lost on me. Emily's rejection freed me to discover gifts I never knew I had, to serve in ways I never imagined possible. Her cruelty became the catalyst for my own resurrection. 3 months ago, I received an unexpected visitor. I was preparing dinner when the buzzer rang, and Mrs. Chen's voice crackled through the intercom. "Margaret, you have guessed. Little girl." My heart stopped. "Sophie." I buzzed her up and opened my door to find my granddaughter standing in the hallway, looking older than her 8 years, clutching a small backpack and fighting back tears. "Nana Maggie," she whispered. "I walked here from school. Mommy doesn't know." I pulled her into my apartment and into my arms, breathing in the familiar sweetness of her hair, while my heart raced with questions. How had she remembered my address? How had an 8-year-old navigated Queens public transportation alone? "Sweetheart, how did you get here?" "I saved my lunch money for the bus," she said proudly, "and I asked 3 different people for directions. I remembered you lived near the Chinese restaurant because you told me about Mrs. Chen's dumplings." The resourcefulness was impressive and terrifying in equal measure. But more than that, it was proof that our bond had survived Emily's attempts to sever it. "Sophie, honey, your mommy is going to be very worried." "She's not worried about anything except Daddy's business," Sophie interrupted with the bitter wisdom of a child who had absorbed too much adult stress. "They fight all the time now. About money, about the house, about everything." My chest tightened. Despite everything Emily had done to me, I didn't want her marriage to fail, didn't want my grandchildren to experience the pain of their family falling apart. "Is that why you came here?" Sophie nodded, tears finally spilling over. "I just wanted to be somewhere quiet, somewhere safe. I remember your house always felt safe." I held her while she cried, feeling the weight of what she was telling me. In the year since our confrontation, Emily's perfect life had apparently begun to crumble. The house I had saved was filled with conflict. The marriage my sacrifice had preserved was fracturing under pressure, but none of that was my responsibility anymore. After Sophie calmed down, I called Emily. The conversation was brief and tense. "She's here," I said without preamble. "Who's Sophie? How did she—" "Never mind. I'm coming to get her. Emily, she's safe. She needed to not run away from school and scare us half to death. This is exactly the kind of thing you would encourage." The accusation was so unfair, so typical of Emily's refusal to take responsibility for her own family's dysfunction, that I almost laughed. Instead, I simply said, "She'll be here when you're ready to pick her up." While we waited, Sophie and I made cookies and talked about school, her friends, the books she was reading. She was bright and articulate, with Emily's quick intelligence but none of her cruelty. Being with her reminded me why I had loved being a mother in the first place. Not the obligation and manipulation that characterized my relationship with Emily now, but the pure joy of nurturing a young mind and heart. When Emily arrived an hour later, she was furious. Not at Sophie for running away, but at me for encouraging this behavior. "You have no right to undermine my authority," she snapped as Sophie reluctantly gathered her things. "I'm not undermining anything. I'm being a safe harbor for a child who was scared and needed comfort." "She wouldn't need comfort if you hadn't put these ideas in her head about our family." "What ideas?" "That she deserves to feel safe in her own home? That adults shouldn't fight constantly about money? That families should treat each other with kindness?" Emily's face flushed. "You don't know anything about our situation. I know Sophie felt scared enough to take 3 buses across Queens to find peace. That tells me everything I need to know." As they left, Sophie hugged me tightly and whispered, "Can I come back sometime?" "Anytime you need me," I whispered back, not caring that Emily heard. The look Emily gave me was pure venom, but I felt only sadness for her. She was so consumed with maintaining control, with being right, with avoiding accountability, that she couldn't see how her behavior was damaging her own children. That night, I prayed not for Emily's heart to soften toward me, but for her to find the wisdom to protect her children from the chaos she and David had created. Some prayers require letting go of our own desires to focus on what truly matters. 2 weeks ago, I received news that felt like the final piece of a complex puzzle clicking into place. Mrs. Patterson called to tell me that Emily and David were separating. David's business ventures all failed, she explained. Apparently, he'd been using credit based on the house value, your house value, to fund increasingly risky investments. Now they owe more than the house is worth, and Emily is talking about bankruptcy. Bankruptcy. The house I had saved was going to be lost anyway. Not to foreclosure, but to David's greed and poor decisions. My $60,000 had simply delayed the inevitable while enabling him to make even worse choices. I thought you should know, Mrs. Patterson continued, that Emily has been calling everyone, family, friends, old acquaintances, asking for money. She told my sister that you had selfishly cut her off, and that's why she's in this situation. Even facing financial ruin, Emily was still blaming me for the consequences of her own choices, still painting herself as the victim of my selfishness, rather than acknowledging that my sacrifice had been squandered on a man who had never learned the value of money he hadn't earned. How are Sophie and Michael handling it? I asked. According to Patricia Morrison, they're staying with David's parents while the divorce proceedings play out. Emily is not handling things well. I felt sadness for Emily. Not the desperate, guilty sadness that had once made me enable her destructive choices, but the clean sadness of watching someone you love suffer the consequences of decisions you had tried to protect them from. This was the pain I should have let her experience a year ago, instead of cushioning her fall with my life savings. Sometimes love meant allowing people to hit bottom so they could finally learn to climb. This morning, as I write these words, I'm preparing for another day of living the life God gave me instead of the life Emily demanded from me. I'll attend Mass, where Father Rodriguez will likely remind us that God works all things together for good for those who love Him. I'll visit Maria and help her children with their homework while she studies for her nursing finals. I'll water my orchid and tend to the small herb garden I've started on my fire escape. I'll live a life measured not by how much I can give away, but by how much love I can receive and return in healthy relationships built on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. Emily may never understand what she lost when she decided I wasn't worth loving without conditions. She may never recognize that her mother's fierce devotion was a gift, not an obligation. She may never realize that the very qualities she found embarrassing, my simplicity, my faith, my contentment with modest pleasures, were actually strengths that could have enriched her life if she had been willing to receive them. But her blindness is no longer my burden to carry. I am 74 years old. I have $8,000 in my savings account, a small apartment filled with love, and a chosen family that sees my value clearly. I have work that matters, friendships that nourish me, and a faith that has been tested by fire and emerged stronger. Most importantly, I have learned the difference between loving someone and losing yourself in the process. I have discovered that boundaries aren't walls that keep love out. They're gates that let the right kind of love in. The garden of my life, stripped bare by winter's cruelty, has bloomed again in ways I never expected. Different flowers than before, planted in soil enriched by suffering, but more beautiful for being chosen rather than inherited. This is what resurrection looks like. Not the restoration of what was broken, but the creation of something entirely new from the ashes of what was lost. I think about you, listening to this story, and I wonder, have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Have you ever given so much of yourself away that you forgot you were worth keeping? Have you ever loved someone who used that love as a weapon against you? If so, I want you to know that your worth isn't determined by how much others are willing to value you. Your purpose isn't defined by how useful you can be to people who take without giving. Your identity isn't dependent on maintaining relationships that require you to disappear. Sometimes the most faithful thing we can do is trust that God loves us enough to want us to protect the life He gave us. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior. Sometimes the most Christian response is to walk away from people who have decided we're not worth treating with dignity. Have you ever had to choose between being needed and being valued? Have you ever discovered that standing up for yourself actually freed you to love more authentically? How has your faith helped you navigate relationships that demanded more than they gave? If this story touched your heart, please share it in the comments. Let someone know they're not alone in this struggle. If you found hope in these words, please like this video and subscribe to this channel so others who need to hear this message can find it. May God bless everyone who has ever had to choose their own worth over someone else's comfort. May He grant you the courage to love without losing yourself, to give without emptying yourself, and to trust that your value exists independent of anyone else's ability to see it. In Jesus' name, amen.